Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The Void Kingdom hung in the space between reality and illusion, a place where time itself bent to the will of those who governed it. Every 100 years, a new ruler was chosen by the creatures of the kingdom, both mythical and ordinary. Fairies, dragons, and even the ethereal void beings all had a say in the election, a process that mirrored the kingdom's balance between the tangible and the mysterious. Tarek stood at the edge of the floating city, his long cloak whipping in the breeze that swirled around him. From this vantage point, he could see the entire kingdom stretched out below, islands of solid land interspersed with swirling clouds of void energy. He closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of the void within him, a steady thrum that connected him to the forces that held the kingdom together. The void had been his to command for as long as he could remember, its powers a gift and a burden that set him apart from others. And now, it was the key to his future. He opened his eyes, gazing at the distant towers of the capital where the election would take place. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life. The time had come to prove that the void could be harnessed for the good of the kingdom, that it wasn't something to be feared, but to be respected and used wisely. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the kingdom, Tarek turned and walked back toward the council hall. The debate was set to begin, and he knew that every word, every gesture, would be scrutinized by the creatures who would decide his fate. He wasn't the only candidate, after all. His rival, Alara, the dragon shaman, had a different vision for the future, one rooted in the kingdom's ancient traditions. She saw balance, harmony with the elemental forces of nature, a stark contrast to Tarek's promise of progress through control of the void. The hall was filled with a diverse crowd when Tarek arrived, his steps echoing off the marble floor. Fairies fluttered above the crowd, their wings catching the light from the floating crystals that illuminated the chamber. Dragons, both in their massive forms and in smaller, humanoid shapes, watched with guarded interest, while the void beings hovered in the shadows, their forms barely perceptible to those without the gift of sight. Tarek could feel their presence, the faint hum of void energy that marked their existence. At the front of the room, the council of elders waited. The head elder, a wizened fairy with silver wings, gestured for silence, her voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. Today, we hear from the candidates who seek to lead the Void Kingdom into the next century, she began. Each will present their vision for the future, and it is up to you, the people, to decide who will best guide us through the challenges that lie ahead. Tarek stood as the elders' words faded, feeling the weight of every eye in the room upon him. He stepped forward, his boots clicking on the stone floor, and cleared his throat. My fellow creatures of the Void Kingdom, he began, his voice calm and steady, we stand at a crossroads. For centuries, we have lived in balance with the void, using its power cautiously, fearing what might happen if we reach too far. But I believe the time has come to embrace the void for what it truly is, a source of limitless potential. He paused, letting his words sink in. With the right control, we can harness the void to bring prosperity to our kingdom. We can expand our cities, create new realms of existence, and ensure that every being, from the smallest fairy to the largest dragon, has the opportunity to thrive. I have spent my life studying the void, learning its secrets, and I am confident that with the right leadership, we can control it, rather than fear it. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd, and Tarek caught sight of Alara, her golden eyes fixed on him, her expression unreadable. She rose gracefully, her long, flowing robes trailing behind her as she approached the center of the hall. Tarek speaks of control, she said, her voice soft but carrying a quiet strength. But I ask you, what happens when control slips? The void is not something that can be tamed. It is a force beyond our understanding, a force that we have lived alongside for centuries, not by trying to dominate it, but by respecting it. My vision for the future is one of balance. We must continue to live in harmony with the elemental forces of nature, as we always have, and not risk the chaos that comes with trying to control the uncontrollable. The room was silent as the two candidates faced each other. Tarek felt the familiar pulse of the void within him, a reminder of the power he held, but also of the dangers that came with it. He had always believed that the void could be controlled, that with enough knowledge and discipline, it could be used for the good of the kingdom. But Allur's words struck a chord. There was a part of him that feared what might happen if he pushed too far, if the void slipped beyond his grasp. The debate continued, each candidate laying out their plans for the future, their visions clashing in the minds of the voters. By the time it ended, the crowd was buzzing with excitement and uncertainty. Tarek knew that he had swayed some, but Allur's message of caution had its appeal. The election was far from decided. As he left the council hall, Tarek felt a chill in the air, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The void was stirring, its energy crackling just beneath the surface of reality. He quickened his pace, his mind racing. Something was happening, something that he hadn't anticipated. Back in his chambers, Tarek sat at his desk, poring over ancient text on void magic, searching for answers. The void had always been a part of the kingdom, a source of power that could be accessed by those with a gift. But recently, it had become more unpredictable, more volatile. He had felt it during the debate, a flicker of energy just on the edge of perception, as if the void itself was reacting to the political unrest. Suddenly, a shadow flickered in the corner of the room, and Tarek's heart skipped a beat. He stood quickly, his hand instinctively reaching for the staff that lay across his desk. The shadow shifted, coalescing into a figure tall, dark, and barely solid, like a silhouette cut from the fabric of the void itself. "Who are you?" Tarek demanded, his voice steady but his pulse quickening. The figure tilted its head, its form shifting and swirling. "I am Kairos," it said, its voice a low, echoing whisper. "I am the void made flesh." Tarek tightened his grip on his staff. He had heard of beings like Kairos, void entities that existed on the edge of reality, creatures born from the raw energy of the void. They were rare, dangerous, and powerful beyond measure. "What do you want?" Tarek asked, his mind racing with the possibilities. Kairos's form shimmered, and Tarek could feel the void's energy pulsating around him. "I have watched you, Tarek," the entity said. "I have seen your ambition, your desire to control the void. But the void is not something that can be controlled. It is a force of chaos, of creation and destruction. And now, it stirs. The election has awakened something within the void, something that cannot be ignored." Tarek narrowed his eyes, his mind working furiously. He had always known that the void was powerful, but he hadn't anticipated that it would react to the political unrest in the kingdom. The election had become more than just a race for power, it had become a catalyst for something far more dangerous. "What are you suggesting?" Tarek asked, his voice low. Kairos's form flickered, the edges of its silhouette dissolving into the shadows. "I am offering you a choice," it said. "Embrace the void, let it consume you, and you will gain power beyond your wildest dreams. But if you resist, the void will consume the kingdom. The choice is yours, Tarek." Tarek stood frozen, the weight of Kairos's words pressing down on him like a shroud. The void had always been a dangerous power, something that required restraint, not recklessness. And yet, here was this entity, this embodiment of the very force Tarek had sought to control, offering him untold power, but at what cost? "I don't need your gifts," Tarek said finally, his voice low but resolute. "The void is already part of me. I've spent my life learning how to wield it, not to let it consume me." Kairos's form shifted, the shadows swirling more intensely around him. "You believe you understand the void, but you do not. Your mastery is an illusion. The void is awakening, and its hunger cannot be satisfied by mere mortals. Whether you wish it or not, the kingdom will be swallowed by the void's chaos. Unless, of course, you take control before it is too late." Tarek gripped his staff tighter, his knuckles white. "You want chaos," he muttered, piecing together the dark entity's motives. "You want destruction, And you think I'll be your pawn? A low, almost inaudible laugh rippled from Kairos. I don't need you to be my pawn. The void will take what it wants regardless. But you can be more than a pawn, you can be a king. The word hung in the air like a curse, and Tarek's heart beat faster. The voidinity was playing to his ambition, tempting him with the very thing he had worked so hard to achieve. But deep down, he knew that to accept Kairos's offer would mean sacrificing everything that mattered: the stability of the kingdom, the trust of its people, his own soul. You misunderstand me, Tarek said, his voice firmer now. I don't seek power for power's sake. I seek it to protect the kingdom, to guide it into a new era. Kairos's form shimmered once again, its dark edges blurring. And what will you protect it from? The void? The very force you cannot hope to contain? The voidinity's voice lowered to a whisper, sending a chill down Tarek's spine. You will fail. And when you do, I will be there to claim what is mine. Before Tarek could respond, the void around Kairos collapsed inward, the dark figure disappearing into the shadows from whence it came. The room fell silent, the hum of void energy fading into the background. Tarek stood still, breathing hard, trying to gather his thoughts. Kairos's words echoed in his mind, but he knew he couldn't dwell on them for long. The election was nearing, and the disturbances in the kingdom were growing worse by the day. If he didn't act soon, the void might indeed consume the kingdom. He needed allies, and he needed them fast. The next morning, Tarek stood before his supporters in the capital's grand square, the sky above shifting from clear blue to swirling void clouds. The people of the kingdom, dragons, fairies, and humans alike, gathered to hear his message, some curious, others fearful. My fellow creatures of the void kingdom, Tarek called out, his voice carrying over the crowd. You've seen the changes in our world. You've felt the shift in the air, the way reality itself bends and breaks. This is the void stirring. It is a power we can no longer ignore. But I assure you, we are not helpless. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the faces of those gathered before him. The void is not our enemy. It is a force of creation, a source of endless possibilities, and with the right guidance, with the right leadership, we can harness that power for the good of the kingdom. We can control it, channel it, and ensure that it works for USA, not against us. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others still wary. Tarek knew he had to address their fears directly. I won't pretend there aren't risks. The void is dangerous, yes. But the greatest danger lies in doing nothing. If we leave the void unchecked, it will consume everything. But if we act, if we stand united, we can prevent that chaos. From the edge of the crowd, a figure stepped forward at Alara. Her golden eyes were piercing, her dragon blood unmistakable in her graceful, commanding presence. She approached Tarek slowly, and the crowd parted to let her through. Alara, Tarek greeted her, his voice carefully neutral. You speak of controlling the void, she said, her voice carrying a quiet strength. But what if control is impossible? What if the only way to survive is to let the void be, to keep our distance and maintain the balance we've always known? Tarek shook his head. The balance is already gone, Alara. You've seen it. You've felt it. The void is coming for us whether we like it or not. The only way to survive is to face it head on. Alara's eyes narrowed, but she didn't back down. And what happens if you lose control? What happens if the void slips through your grasp? For a moment, Tarek was silent. The truth was, he didn't know. He had always believed in his ability to control the void, to bend it to his will. But Kairos's words haunted him, a dark reminder of the chaos that could be unleashed if he failed. I won't lose control, he said finally, his voice firm. I've spent my life mastering the void. I know its dangers, but I also know its potential. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to protect this kingdom. Alar studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well, Tarek. I hope, for all our sakes, you're right. The crowd watched in silence as the two candidates stood face to face, each representing a different path for the future of the Void Kingdom. The election was fast approaching, and the kingdom teetered on the edge of chaos. Whatever happened next would determine the fate of them all. That night, as the city quieted and the stars blinked into view through the swirling void clouds, Tarek returned to his chambers. He had convinced some of the electorate, but it wasn't enough. He needed a decisive victory, and he needed to quell the disturbances in the void before they spiraled out of control. But as he sat at his desk, staring at the ancient text on void magic, he felt a presence again at Kairos, lurking just beyond the veil of reality. Tarek stood, bracing himself for another confrontation. But this time, Kairos didn't manifest in his chambers. Instead, a soft whisper echoed through the air, barely audible. "You will see soon enough, Tarek. The void cannot be tamed. It can only be consumed." Tarek's hands clenched into fists. He knew he couldn't let Kairos's words distract him, but the doubt gnawed at him, a shadow creeping into his thoughts. In the days that followed, the disturbances grew more frequent. The sky flickered between light and shadow, the void seeping into the edges of reality. Creatures disappeared without a trace, only to reappear days later with no memory of where they had been. Dragons, once revered for their strength and wisdom, began to speak of dreams filled with darkness and chaos, visions of a world where the void reigned supreme. And through it all, Tarek remained determined. He gathered his allies, fairies and void beings alike, preparing for the final stretch of the election campaign. But he knew that the election was no longer just about politics, it was about survival. The night before the election, Tarek stood atop the highest tower in the floating city, staring out at the kingdom below. The void swirled ominously in the distance, and he could feel its power more acutely than ever before. Kairos was right about one thing: that the void was waking up, and it wasn't going to wait for the outcome of the election. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. The decision was clear now. If the void couldn't be controlled, it had to be contained. He needed to stop it from spreading before it consumed the entire kingdom. But to do that, he would have to face the void head on, and that meant confronting Kairos. Without hesitation, Tarek called upon the void, letting its energy flow through him like a current. The world around him shimmered and dissolved, and within moments, he was no longer standing on the tower but in the heart of the void itself. The landscape was an endless expanse of swirling darkness, punctuated by flashes of light and shadow. And at the center of it all stood Kairos, his form more solid now, more real. The void entity smiled, a cold, predatory grin. "So, you finally come," Kairos said, his voice a low rumble. "I was wondering how long it would take." Tarek didn't respond. He raised his staff, the void energy crackling around him. This was the moment he had been preparing for. He would either contain the void or be consumed by it. With a roar, Kairos lunged forward, the void swirling around him in a maelstrom of chaos. Tarek stood his ground, channeling every ounce of his strength into his magic. The void energy surged through him, and for a moment, he felt the power of the void in its purest form, unpredictable, destructive, but also beautiful. Kairos's attack collided with Tarek's magic, the two forces clashing with a thunderous roar. The void trembled, the very fabric of reality straining under the weight of their battle. Tarek gritted his teeth, his muscles straining as he fought to hold his ground. But Kairos was relentless, his attacks coming faster, harder. Tarek's control began to slip, the void threatening to overwhelm him. He could feel the chaos creeping in, the darkness closing around him. "No!" Tarek shouted, his voice echoing through the void. He couldn't let Kairos win. He couldn't let the void consume everything. With a final burst of energy, Tarek pushed back, forcing Kairos to retreat. The void entity snarled, its form flickering as the balance shifted. "You cannot win," Kairos hissed. "The void will always consume." Tarek's eyes burned with determination. Not today. With one final spell, he summoned the full power of the void, not to destroy, but to contain. The void energy wrapped around Kairos, binding him in place, trapping him within the very force he had sought to control. Kairos screamed in fury, but it was too late. The void closed around him, sealing him away. Tarek fell to his knees, exhausted but victorious. The void was contained, for now, the kingdom was safe. As he stood, the world around him began to shimmer and fade, and moments later, he was back in the floating city, the election day dawning on the horizon. The election was won, but the battle for control of the void had only just begun.